Welcome, Tiankai. It's wonderful to have you here. I really do appreciate you joining us as a guest. So, to get started, maybe could you tell us a bit about you and where you're from, what your interests are, and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. I'm Tiankai. I'm currently professionally the data strategy and data governance lead at ThoughtWorks Europe, which is a consultancy focusing on tech and data topics. Before that, I was working for 6 years at Adidas, where I was leading the product data governance team at some other data roles. And even before that, I had basically a range of different data roles as well. I'd like to say that it was a pretty linear career that I had so far, really spending all of it in data, but looking at it and working in it from different angles, which has been really nice. Personally, I was born and raised in Germany, although my parents came in the 80s as Chinese immigrants who did their PhDs here. Given that setup, I had a strong, I would say, educational encouragement from my parents all my time here, but also had my own thoughts about how to be creative and how to be different, growing up as basically someone different in a country where not many people look like me, basically, right? And I think all of them came together also with my interest in music, where I took piano classes very early on. And then was part of bands and big bands and all these kind of things. So yeah, now I'm actually in that passion about educating and teaching people more things about data and to make it less abstract and less dry and make it more fun. And I do that with using my humor, my music, and other things. And yeah, now just very recently, I did write a book about it too, which is called Humanizing Data Strategy, where I'm basically using also personal anecdotes and experiences to make data topics more clearer and approachable. And yeah, I wrote a lot of songs that I'm also putting on YouTube, etc. And I spoke at a TEDx Nuremberg event where I also gave a talk about the human side of AI. Yeah, that's about me.
Awesome. And congratulations on your book. That's
Thank you very
wonderful.
much.
And also your TED Talk. So those are two great events or outcomes that's come from this. You mentioned that you've really worked in data environment very strongly over the years. Have you worked in particular industries or have you worked across industries?
I would say I have worked across industries. So I for sure spent a lot of time, I would say, in the sports and footwear industry because of Adidas. But before and after that, now I'm as a consultant, I'm consulting different industries as well. And I think though, although in different industries you might have different data parts, like in pharmaceuticals, you might have R&D more, and you might have for tech companies a much stronger product data set because all the digital products have data. But some of the business processes are always the same, right? Let's say financial business processes or sales and marketing business processes. They are usually at the common ground. And these are the parts where it's most, I would say, direct to optimize based on data. And I usually use that common ground between the different industries to have a starting point. But I'm also very eager to learn about new industries and what makes them tick, basically, and extend my horizons that way to see what else is out there. And yeah, how data is actually influencing the different industries as well.
Quite interesting. So data for most people out there seems like this abstract concept, right? What do people mean by data? So if you had to describe what is data and what's a data strategy, what does that mean for the average person?
Absolutely. I think when I'm basically asked about that, I usually start with what everyone can relate to. And I would say that data is all around us. And the closest data that you probably are dealing with anyway are your personal finances, right? You probably look once in a while into your bank statements and look into how much money is coming in and how much money is going out. And you maybe calculate a budget, you maybe try to optimize your spending behavior, et cetera, et cetera. That is working with data, right? In a way, you look at those numbers, you try to analyze them in your head, you try to look at where you might be able to save more money and where else you have to have mandatory expenses, let's say, and you make a choice based on it. And if you scale it up to organizations, it's pretty much the same, right? Now it's not personal finances, but corporate finances. And you have a lot of data points to look at. Where is the money going? Where is the money coming in? And you try to make the best out of it to gain a profit and to make investment choices, right? And that is more on the financial side, of course. But even then, basically, if you extend it to, let's say, organizing your household, right? I think Legos, for those who have kids or who are themselves still Lego fans, right? Trying to have a picture of how many Lego pieces of different kinds and different colors you have is also almost a data work, right? Categorizing, basically inventorizing all of that, and then making choices about how much Legos you want to buy or you want to purchase for different ways. All of that is working with data. It all starts with, I would say, quantifying things, looking at numbers and facts, and then interpreting it to make a choice. And this is what we call data-driven decision making or data-informed decision making, right? You use the data to make better choices and take better actions compared to if you would do it just based on gut feeling and not knowing exactly what is going on. And
Mm.
that is really the basic of it all. And I'm just basically there to try to transfer that kind of thinking and behavior to more and more elements in the world.
That's great. I suppose there's also things like your birth certificates and being able to understand how we name things, our medical
Exactly.
records, and those kind of things. Maybe I'll just touch on that. New Zealand got hacked with their medical records in two hospitals. And that was obviously quite devastating. And that's data, right? And that has people are getting information about particular patients and so forth and their medical records. So, how do you relate data governance, understanding what data means? What should people know about your data and our digital cybersecurity, all of those components that make up our data?
Absolutely. First, in a nutshell, what data governance is about is to make data more trustworthy by ensuring that data is created, processed, and used in a secure and meaningful way. That is how I would, in one sentence, describe what data governance is about. And a big part of it, mostly driven exactly by, let's say, the bad things that happen in the world and the legal requirements, are about avoiding risks, right? Compliance as a topic is really a big, I think, important area of data governance. And the thing about it is that although you have all of these frameworks that given the different regions we have, there are different laws about it, but there's a lot of data privacy, and that is what the medical records are referred to. Because they are very personal and they are usually information that should not get out to the public, those are always treated in a very special way, and they need to be treated with extra security and extra care. And what I always find interesting is that what companies are first facing is they need to be compliant to laws, but it
Mm.
should be actually in their own interest to protect the data of, let's say, their patients in that case, because besides being legally fined afterwards, it's much worse if the patients and the customers lose their trust in you, right? Because that has a long-term effect. If you are not acting like you can protect their data and their sensitive information, then that is a problem. Why should people still go to your place or should work with you if that is the case? Overall, though, I think when it comes to data governance, we should differentiate between two different things. One is, let's say, the basic readiness for different risks. And that means you have accountability for individual people in the organization that are overseeing the risks that are there and to make the right choice about how to avoid them. It means you have the right processes, right? In case something bad happens, what do we do in what sequence to minimize the damage that has happened? Or how to make sure that we prevent damage that's going to happen as quickly as possible. And lastly, the technology enablement, right? So what kind of technologies do we use so we don't have to do manual audits all the time to check if things are right? But we get alerts, we get maybe automatic recommendations on how to make things better automatically. And once you have those in place, you can always adapt it to different use cases, right? It might be patients for hospitals. It might be customers for your e-commerce website. It might be vendors for your marketplace that you're running. All of these data is sensitive and they need to be secure. So using like a set of foundational capabilities that you have, you can adapt it always to the different needs.
That's good. So, what made you write a book about humanizing data? Because that kind of, I'm trying to understand what are you saying in your book, and what are the key learning points?
Sure, that's a great question. I would say that usually when we talk about data strategy or data governance, it's always about change management or transformations, right? We're not only changing processes and changing the technologies, it's always about changing human behavior as well. And although everybody knows that change management is hard, I feel like data in the data area of data, it's still very much underemphasized and not really too much put in focus. And it's often even communicated as a weakness of data strategy and data governance, right? Oh, the people part, that's always the hardest. And
Yes.
then it's just basically sign off. But that is not okay, I would say, right? Because in the end, data is only valuable when it's being used for creating value. And if you give up on data, then you're not creating any value. So what's the point of doing it in the first place? And so bringing people along and using the empathy and human side of data
Mm.
leaders to actually bring them on the journey instead of just pushing them away and say, you do what you need to do. I don't know how to deal with you anyway. That is important. So the whole book is really about what are some advice and tips and tricks, basically how to bring people along and make them part of a journey. There's a lot about, I basically break it down into the 5 C's, which are collaboration, communication, competence, creativity, and conscience, all of which I am claiming to be basic human needs, right? Trying to
Yeah.
communicate as human, trying to be better and competent at something is human, trying to collaborate with others and being a team is human. We should build on that. We should not treat it as a weakness, but really as a strength of human beings to do that. And we can apply it to data as well. So that's what my book is about. I hope it resonates with people. I always hear that's the hardest, but also the most important part. So I was trying to address that with a specific book.
Good idea. And also, I know over the last, I don't even know how many years, a long time, people have been, they enter data. Let's say you at work, right? So you enter in
Mhm.
data. It could be in multiple instances, whether it's requirements, whether it's call centers, whether it's in any setting, really, you're working with data consistently.
Mhm.
What about the quality of data? Because not everyone cares about what's been entered because there's no real understanding around the consequences of what that means. So, what is your thought on the human behavior
Mhm.
towards the value of data?
Absolutely. I think data quality is exactly the right aspect to mention on this because when we go into the more academic, let's say, definition of data quality, it's mentioned that data, the degree to which data is fit for purpose, right? And fit for purpose itself also exactly defines it in a very human way. Because on the one hand side, purpose means you need to know what the data is being used for. And fit means that everybody agrees on what actually is good enough to meet the requirements of what is being used for, right?
Mm.
And those two already immediately reflect the human side of it again, right? So knowing and being transparent about what the data is being used for is human decisions about being transparent or not, right? And agreeing together means there's a lot of negotiation, a lot of conflict mediation happening to actually make sure we all agree to the same set. And once that happens, then you can actually make improvements towards what is defined as fit for purpose to say, okay, we are very far or only closely nearby to fit for purpose. What changes do we need to make the data better? And you're right. I think when it comes to human created data, that's a big chunk of it. Usually, the reason for data quality being then that bad is exactly the communication transparency missing between who created the data and who is using the data. Often it's like this that you have a product manager, let's say for a physical product, right? Let's say washing machine, right? And they create all of these data points in the very beginning for their own logistical reasons, right? They want to get it produced by factories and then sold. But then there's like a data scientist who's creating like a predictive model about how much demand for washing machines are out there over time. And that data scientist is very unhappy about all of the things that are wrong or that are not meeting their requirements in the data set. But the one who is for the first time creating the data doesn't even know that the data scientist is working with that data to make any great predictions, right? And that's why I feel like in data governance, when you talk about data quality, it's a lot about bringing people together. You almost act like this glue or this kind of facilitator to bring different parties together and say, look, you guys are working on the same things, but you never talk to each other. Let's talk all together about what's going on here. So yeah, data quality really starts with human collaboration and human accountability, and then it gets into more technical details. But first, there needs to be that acknowledgement that data is not just on its own, but it surpasses actually different areas. And all of these need to come together to talk about it.
Let's talk a little bit about AI and data. So, let me go back a step. So when you look at data, there's lots of history,
Mhm.
right? And people keep data which is outdated, and there's lots of shadowware and systems that aren't really speaking to each other, and those are all these challenges, right?
Right.
And so we might have data that's meaningless, if you want to use that term. It might be outdated and shouldn't be used anymore, and
Right.
that kind of thing. So I assume when we have AI and AI is using data sets in
Mhm.
order to make predictions and do those kind of things, we don't always have the best data. Maybe could you explain what your viewpoint is on this relationship with kind of bad data and maybe good data and AI?
Absolutely. I think you are actually raising a really good point because when you starting to do AI, the demand as compared to, let's say, reporting use cases where you only look at the last 12 months, how good your sales is doing, AI is famous for having requiring a lot more historical data to learn from it, right? We want to imitate human intelligence with machines, and we often apply machine learning basically to do that, right? But the thing about machine learning is that if you ask a machine to basically learn based on a given data set on their own to imitate human beings, then it doesn't only imitate the good things, it very much imitates the bad things too. Because AI on its own doesn't know what is right and wrong. Only human beings have that moral compass in themselves to say, oh, that doesn't look right, or that does look very much right. So if you, without any oversight, just give that bunch of data to a machine learning, and the older the data is the less quality it has, then you get into very quickly some troubling outcomes because you don't know why AI is now giving all of these wrong results and giving you the opposite of what sounds like a good choice, basically what you're making. And that is, I think, where I realize nowadays a lot of the AI efforts, they're finally realizing that basically data foundation is really important. And before they jump into being public with these new Gen AI use cases and chatbots and LLMs, et cetera, they want to first check if even the right data is fed to it. And I think to be fair, checking how good the data is that's being learned from the machines is an area that is not that clearly defined yet, right? I think I talked about data governance, about checking if it's privacy data or not, checking if the data quality is good or not. But there are new elements to it that are very important to society, right? Like bias or fairness in data, right? So especially when it's about customer data, you don't want, let's say, certain races or certain genders to be discriminated. But the older you get, the more unfortunately you probably get this kind of data points where these things are happening. So where do you draw the line, right? How do you define who is checking for bias, how it's bias defined, and who's checking at the end in the outcomes, if that is okay and fair or not? And all of that, I think, needs to be more put in focus nowadays. But
Mhm.
again, I think it starts with having the acknowledgement of that this is a new thing that everybody needs to deal with, and then getting the right experts together to basically deal with what good data is for AI purposes.
Mm. Here's another question. So, you work as an enterprise or a business architect, you use a lot of conceptual data, and the obviously the purpose is to get a almost like a straw man picture of the business and how the components work. And obviously, with data, you have more physical models and not so much conceptual modeling or logical modeling. So, how would you describe the relationship between the different architectures, including data architecture, and how they should be working together?
Yeah. I actually am a big proponent of enterprise architecture and data architecture working very closely together because it's exactly the bridge that you just mentioned between the conceptual, logical, and physical world that's often missing. The reason for that being that I feel that the conceptual and logical side of things is the closest to the business side of things, right? This is what how business processes are working. This is how the objects are relating to each other, and this is how an organization generates value with it. And physical data modeling is more fit for the specific purpose on a specific system, which needs to be done anyway. But it's also exactly treated that way. That now we have to have a new system, so we need to do physical data modeling. Let's just get it over with, and then we're done with it. But it should be actually very closely linked to the business, because otherwise you have the risk that you have that customized system now that the data architects and solution architects came up with. Oh, now it works with the old system that we migrated, but it doesn't really fit the users of the system. Let's
Mhm.
say, like in CRM, for example, or in the ERP system. all of those people, they're like, wait, hold on, why is now this even different than before? I'm not used to it. It doesn't help me at all. It costs me maybe 5 more minutes even to do what I needed to do before. How does it come together? I feel both enterprise architecture and specifically data architecture should work closely together and exactly bridge that conceptual, logical, and physical worlds, and
Mm.
to go from the abstract into more specifics. But in a way, it's a great vehicle to create guardrails too, right? Because at least you can avoid the misalignment between the physical world and the logical creative world if you start working together from the beginning and not only afterwards realize that there has been a gap.
Yeah. I think people don't realize how important as a business it is to
Mhm.
have the conceptual understanding of what we do, because they get boots in the ground and start working.
Yeah.
And yeah, you got data and that. But I always say, if you're building a house, you really want to conceptually understand what that design looks like, how
Hmm.
it's all built. And a house design is not an actual house. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I've got this design and here's my house." I'm like, "It's not a house. It's literally a piece of paper." But
Yeah.
so understanding that, let's say the real world, the physical world versus the data or not data, digital world, the principles apply when it comes to designing your business and designing the different things. But it does seem a quantum leap for people to really put those two um, aspects together.
Yeah. To that point, that's a really good one because even talking about building a house as an example, and I think even based on centuries ago, we started having two lanes towards building a house. You have the architects who are the artists, and you have the engineers who need to make it feasible and build it actually in the end, right?
Yeah.
And I think that translates very well to the digital world in basically in organizations. But
Hmm.
the thing is, if you don't have the vision of how it's supposed to be from the architect first, and you only ask an engineer to make it functional without knowing what it's actually for, then you get into trouble, right? But that bridge between architects and engineering very much exists also in organizations, right? And bringing those business modeler and conceptual modelers together with the actual implementers is really key because you just have different areas of expertise that really can come together and make the right choice together.
Mm. I would definitely agree with that. It makes sense that we understand conceptually and we agree and we understand that that's the best option, and then we get boots in the ground and things change. And I think that's why
Absolutely.
people have to be agile and they have to adapt to the changes, because I often say to people, I like watching reno shows where they're renovating houses and they have this great plan and everything, and then
Yeah.
they start building and next minute they find this, oh dear, budget cut, all of those
Yeah.
kind of things.
True.
And so the renovation of a house is a good indication of these projects that we have in business. We have to make decisions. It doesn't always go exactly according to plan. So let's talk about your career a little
Hmm.
bit. Um, what are your key experiences? So what have you gone through during your career, and has there been any key things that have shaped where you are today?
Yes, that's a very good question. So I would say chronologically, right? I did study industrial engineering, which meant it was a mix between a business administration major and an engineering major. And I chose marketing and database systems as my
Mm.
two focus areas, which when I graduated then exactly became a thing called marketing analytics, because that was exactly the time where social media was measurable, websites were measurable, advertising was measurable. And I basically jumped into that niche to say, okay, now we can all of a sudden do data-driven marketing, right? We use all of the data points, we optimize against it, and we know what is working, what isn't. And I think that was, on the one hand side, very exciting because I always enjoyed advertising. So I learned how actually use the objective side of data, the rational side of data, to make choices about the creative side of data, because advertisement itself sounds
Yeah.
more artistic, but you got directions that certain length of advertisements or certain designs of advertisements were working better than others. So you almost had information towards the creativity of it that really opened my eyes. I was like, wow, this is really how the rational and the creative side can come together. I think the second point was when I was at Adidas doing social media and voice of consumer analytics as one of them. The good side of it was still to optimize social media presence and making better marketing choices. But let's say, for example, during COVID, when things are were all a little bit in flux, a lot of the crisis and issue management was lying within my team too, right? And I realized how quickly you can actually act based on data if you have the right infrastructure and the right process to turn these data points into actionable insights, right? And how you can also, if you want to, get a very quick turnaround to leaders who need to make the right choices, as long as we all have the same objectives, right? And let's say now all of our retail stores are closed, which a lot of companies went through during the pandemic. Can we optimize our e-commerce channels, right? And then what kind of advertising should we do? All of that kind of was a really fast turnaround. And that really showed me if you just focus and prioritize and come together with other people in the organization, it doesn't have to be that political or complicated, right? We just all want to achieve the same thing. Let's just do it. And the last thing I would say is now having switched from the corporate side to the consulting side, which in comparison, when you work in corporate, you always have to fight for attention, especially when it's regarding data foundations, right? Not many people get it. Data governance is not the most sexy area. So trying to get attention to it was like streaming into the ether and hoping that somebody would react all the time. But being a consultant for it is different because when clients are engaged, they already
Mm.
made a choice that is important to them. They already agreed to spend money on it, right? So when I come in as a consultant, it's very welcoming, right? Everybody
Mhm.
wants and just desperately wanting to listen to what I have to say and how to help them in a situation. So that kind of turning around how it would be without that resistance actually showed me how much is possible if you are people who are willing to listen, right? And but it also showed me that there's always a balance to be struck between not having any interest and trying to go away from it towards how to convince people to then actually pay attention to it.
Mm.
Yeah. I think those would be my highlights and my biggest, the game changers in my career, so to say.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good. And I think that's a really good point because a lot of people, whether you're an analyst and analyzing big projects, or whether you're an architect, enterprise or business, you as a consultant are appreciated more. And it's just crazy. If people understood that if they nurtured some of those roles within the organization and actually listened,
Yeah,
it could really be helpful. But maybe that whole model will change in the future. In other words,
that's true.
everything will be outsourced and the value will be measured. It's quite interesting because when you look at things like the way businesses are going and you look at how things work, you could outsource a lot of services now and
Hmm.
rather have a micro business. When I say micro, the big names are never going to go away, but rather bring in specialists when you need them. And yeah, so there might be some changes. So what?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
No, go for
Yeah.
it.
No, I was just thinking that a lot of, I think, what have the feeling about is especially in data that you're not treating consultants only as an extended workbank anymore, right? There's classical just borrowing people from other companies and let them do operational stuff. A lot more need is towards getting consultants in who can teach your own organization how to do things. So it becomes a limited time engagement. And then ideally by the end of that engagement, the people inside the organization know how to do it. So you almost bring in those hands-on teachers in, show us how it works, and then we can do it ourselves. Which
Yeah.
is, I think, the more sustainable way of doing it anyway, because otherwise you're fully dependent forever, basically,
Yeah.
on
I know.
these external workforces. And when
Yeah.
budget is not going well and you get cuts, then you're in big trouble, right? But if you are teaching your own employees and team members how to do things, not only is it a bit less risky, but also you're motivating ideally your team members to grow and for them to learn new things, which makes them happier too. And the organization is happier because you have new capabilities in the organization. So I feel like definitely, as you said, there might be a change of this business model with consulting and agencies. And let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose it all boils down to knowledge, right? So, how do we share knowledge? How do we make have some longevity around that
Hmm.
knowledge, building the competencies, building the understanding, and so forth. So, let's talk about the future. There's lots going on and it's happening very rapidly. So we have AI, of course. We have multiple trends going. And as you mentioned, you did work in the marketing space. There's lots going on now. AI is
Hmm.
having a big trigger in the marketing environment as well. So, what do you see the next? I don't even want to say 10 years. Let's say 5 years.
Oof. Yeah.
What do you think the next 5 years will bring to the table, and what should we be aware of?
Yes. So I would say maybe a specific sub area of AI, but automation will be much more in focus over the next 5 years. And we are now, I think we have come to that stage where automation can really work. Because before that, I think it was difficult to automate because the rules of human behavior were not clear and you couldn't really ask machines to do it. But nowadays, I think the capabilities and the computing power of AI is just much better, so they can much more help us automate things. And by that, really the tedious human tasks of, for example, cleaning data or just clicking on emails and doing the different things with it, sorting things, all of that I think can be really more automated. I think a lot of the efforts are going towards that to increase efficiency there. And that in hindsight also means, or on the other side means, that people need to be more aware how to steer and control AI as well, right? And only trusting the AI engineers and the AI experts to do it, I don't think is enough. I think there needs to be more intrinsic motivations to use AI in the right way. And that requires some upskilling, encouragement, and motivation for people to do also, and how to interact basically with different AI interfaces in the future as well. And
Mm,
on that note, also, I think once, especially in data governance, for example, things are automated, people have more consciousness, then the focus will be more towards looking into the future and less about moving retrospectively now.
yeah,
Because a lot about it right now in data governance is fixing what has happened in the past and now
yeah,
try to make it work. But if all of that finally can be solved in a quicker time, then we finally can be more proactive, right? Either dealing with what are the new use cases that we have to implement or dealing with new laws that might happening. But if you can focus a
mm,
little bit more as organizations towards something for the future, then I think we would avoid a lot of that AI hype that is overhyped right now, where everybody's doing it and then many of them fail and now everybody goes back to do their homework, let's say, right? That ideally happens a bit less in the future as well.
mm, mm. Those are really good points. When it comes to AI and data, there's things like prompting, there's things like
Mhm.
adding your data sets to help get AI to do better. What are your views on what people should know around how to use their data to get better results from AI?
Yeah. First of all, I think people should not put sensitive data into public AI agents, right? That is just not okay, especially ChatGPT and Copilot, etc., if you use the public version, because you cannot control what's going to happen to your data, right? There's really not any kind of liability about what sensitive data will be learned from and what isn't. And that can be really tricky for any organization. But once actually you do it in a safe way, let's say you get your own organizational specific environment where you can do generative AI or any other AI, then it's a bit better. But there still needs to be human oversight on what the outcome of those AI processes are.
Yeah,
If you're not the expert and you're then asking AI to be a better expert than you are in it, then you have no way
it's a
of checking if the results are right or wrong, right?
yeah,
And if you think about that in chain reaction all the way to the top, then things can be really disastrous, right? Somebody creating like a ChatGPT version of something, and the results are cascaded all the way up because nobody actually can check if the results are wrong or right. Then you might make a really bad choice. So
mm,
I think learning how to prompt is one thing and how to interact with, let's say, chatbots. But even more importantly, always double check the results, right? At least just in some ways to make sure that there's not completely wrong, but then let that inform you how to prompt better or how to give feedback to that specific AI application
yeah,
to improve what it's doing. That's
yeah.
important.
It's quite interesting because, in my experience, a lot of people don't understand that you don't just enter something and get a result. It's actually a conversation. And uh, people don't think of that because they're so used to you do a search query and you get all
Correct.
the
Yeah.
results, and then you do another search query. So, how would you describe that to people? Like, how are you putting in? And specifically, you mentioned the if you're using APIs from those groups like OpenAI and you're actually storing it locally, what does that local data mean compared to using ChatGPT itself? What does that look like? I know there's two questions there, but yeah.
Sure. I think first, maybe to the second part of it is that when you have it locally, or at least within your own cloud environment, depending on how you're working, then you keep it basically safe within your own cybersecurity borders,
Yeah.
let's say, right? And that is always important, especially when you do more specific things to your organization. You don't want certain information to be leaked, right? Anyway,
Mhm.
because again, back to your points about patient data being leaked, that is even probably easy to use now, basically public AI applications to do it. And
Mm.
so we should really shy away from that. And that just creates a safe environment so you can experiment better without having the fear of something bad is going to happen to the data, I would say. Um, what was the first part of the question again?
That was just around the conversation that people don't realize
All
that,
right. Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
AI is actually a conversational piece from both sides, both parties, almost like augmenting
Exactly.
your discovery. Um, okay, let's talk about people who might be interested in a similar role to what you do. So whether that's, data governance or data science or really doing data analytics or architecture, what advice would you give to people wanting to enter the field and why?
Yes. I think if you have not been a data expert before, but you worked and built up an expertise in a specific subject matter area, right? Let's say you worked in finance or you worked in healthcare for a while or so on, then this is exactly now the right time to go into data. Because I think as data professionals, we all realize that only being methodological experts about data is one thing, but if you don't have the necessary business acumen, that links what you're doing to a specific industry and specific value chain, then it doesn't really work that well. So if you bring that kind of expertise from a specific business area too, and you learn the hard skills of how to do data, then you have really good chances to be very successful very quickly in that field. Now, nonetheless, getting up to speed in the hard skills can be quite daunting, I would say, because there's so much out there. I would say, on the one hand side, knowing how data works generally, and there's some really good books about it, and just the whole world of, let's say, data strategy as well, can give you really a glimpse into how to get started and how you think about data. But then also the hard skills like SQL and Python, I think would be good ones if you, someone listening that haven't had that experience yet. But I would not overinvest into languages and coding at the beginning. Just get the kind of the gist of it, try to understand how data people work for now, and then jump into it. Try to maybe do a rotation into an area with data expertise, do exchange with your data colleagues or with other companies that are working in data. And all of that can really get you into it. I think that has been my observation that data professionals had been really proud of their job for a long time, and they on purpose made it very complicated. So the fear of non-data experts was really high to say, that sounds really complicated. Should I really enter this? But now we come into that area where we are a little bit regretting that. Like we almost think like we should actually get more people into data, and we have not made it ourselves very easily to welcome them. And now
Mm.
let's talk about data literacy and data fluency and let everyone be a bit more aware of it so we can actually work in a more scalable way. So all of that together means it's the right time now. Do a little bit of basic learning, but then try to go practical as soon as possible by just getting into different departments and with colleagues.
Mm. That's great. My last question for you.
Uh-huh.
If you could go back in time
Mhm.
and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
That's a great question. I would say, I would tell especially my student self who just graduated that there is no dream job, that it all depends, and there's always a trade-off, no matter where you work. You might love some of the things, but you might really hate some of the things. As soon as you come out with a net positive, then it's good. And a dream job is not something that you just get, but it's something that you need to shape. So no matter where you go, never lose the energy and the drive to shape the job into a way that works for you. And that is what I should do. I learned that the hard way. That's why I'm giving myself that advice if I could. That I just listened and obeyed in the beginning, and it didn't really work. And once I started shaping it into a direction that worked better for my style and for the era that I was in, the more successful I got. Yeah, that would be my advice to my younger self.
That's great. I suppose it's all about creating your world. It's
Hmm.
not as we spoke a lot about the reality of data versus conceptual thinking, and I suppose it's bringing those two together, actually.
Exactly. Absolutely. Very good point. Yeah.
So, if somebody wants to get hold of your book or get in touch with you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah. My book is out on all of Amazon right now. It's called Humanizing Data Strategy. So everyone who's interested can get a copy there. People personally can go on LinkedIn to connect with me. I'm happy to take any questions or meet other people who are interested in data or who work in data. And for my like funny music videos, people could go to my YouTube channel as well and really check out basically some of the music that I do around data and other topics.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. That's a nice intersection. That's awesome. Um, all right. So that's been a fantastic interview. I want to say thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate your time, your insight, and a very robust, fluent discussion around data and all things around data. So that's been great. Thank you for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.